North Atlantic, April 29, 1943. 43 merchant ships are moving west to east across the most dangerous stretch of ocean in the world. Their cargo is the material that keeps Britain alive: food, fuel, ammunition, the industrial blood of a war economy that produces nothing it cannot import. Behind them, ahead of them, and on both flanks, the ocean is full of U-boats. Not a patrol, not a standard wolf pack of 8 or 10 submarines. 51 U-boats have been vectored onto this convoy by Dönitz's headquarters in Berlin, the largest concentration of submarine force ever assembled against a single convoy in the entire Battle of the Atlantic. The escort commander, Commander Peter Gretton, has 9 ships to defend 43. He has no aircraft support. He has weather so violent that his smaller escorts are shipping water over their bridges, and his crews have not slept properly in 4 days. An Admiralty analyst reviewing the situation on April 30th puts the convoy's survival odds in a category that does not invite optimism. What happens over the next 7 days will look at first glance like a German victory. It is the opposite. It is the moment the Battle of the Atlantic ends. To understand what ONS-5 decided, you need to understand where the Atlantic battle stood in the spring of 1943. The preceding 6 months had been the worst of the entire war for Allied shipping. In November 1942, German U-boats sank 117 ships. In the first 20 days of March 1943, they sank 97 ships in 2 convoy battles, so catastrophic that the Admiralty privately assessed the possibility that the Atlantic supply lines could no longer be kept open. Donitz had more U-boats operational than at any point in the war. Over 400 submarines were in commission, with over 100 at sea at any given moment. The Wolfpack tactic had been refined over 3 years of operational experience. His commanders and crews were experienced, aggressive, and operating with equipment: the acoustic torpedo, improved search receivers, better communications that had significantly enhanced their capability. Against this, the Allies had developed their own countermeasures: improved radar, better depth charges, the Hedgehog, a head-throwing weapon that allowed escorts to attack submarines without losing sonar contact, air cover from very long-range liberators operating from Iceland and Newfoundland that was slowly closing the Black Gap where convoys had crossed unprotected. But in April 1943, the Black Gap was still open. ONS-5 was sailing directly through it.
Peter Gretton was 31 years old and had been fighting the Battle of the Atlantic for 3 years when he took command of Escort Group B7 in early 1943. He was not a glamorous figure in the way that some wartime commanders became glamorous. He was precise, aggressive, and possessed of a tactical intelligence that expressed itself in positioning and timing rather than dramatic gesture. His ships were not the newest or the best equipped. B7 was a mixed group of destroyers and corvettes whose crews had been trained to an exceptionally high standard through Gretton's systematic attention to the specific skills that convoy escort required. When ONS-5 sailed from Liverpool on April 22nd, Gretton knew what was ahead. Intelligence from Bletchley Park, Ultra, had given a partial picture of the U-boat deployments in the convoy's path. Partial because Donitz had changed his cipher procedures and Ultra's coverage had gaps. Sufficient to know that whatever was waiting in the North Atlantic was larger than anything previously assembled. The weather hit first. A force 10 gale that scattered the convoy, separated escorts from their charges, and created conditions in which maintaining formation was an achievement independent of any enemy action. Merchant ships built for reasonable sea conditions were taking seas that tested their structural limits. Smaller escort vessels were operating at the boundary of what their crews could physically sustain. Through the first days, Gretton held the convoy together by the combination of constant radio coordination, precise positioning of his escorts, and the kind of aggressive response to every U-boat contact that communicated to German commanders that this convoy was defended by people who intended to fight rather than merely escort. The U-boats began their attacks on May 4th. What followed was unlike any convoy battle previously fought in the Atlantic. The scale of the attacking force, the violence of the weather, and the exhaustion of both sides created a combat environment of extraordinary chaos, in which individual actions by individual commanders on both sides had consequences that rippled through the entire engagement. U-boats attacking in the darkness found escort vessels responding with a speed and accuracy that suggested the British knew where they were before they attacked. Sometimes Ultra had provided warning, sometimes Y-service tactical intercepts had given positioning data. Sometimes Gretton's escorts had simply developed the pattern recognition that 3 years of Atlantic warfare had built into their commanders.
The attacks cost the convoy ships. 13 merchant vessels went to the bottom over 7 days, their crews dying in water so cold that survival beyond minutes was unlikely without immediate rescue, their cargoes joining the wreckage that had been accumulating on the Atlantic floor since 1939. The attacks also cost the U-boats. 7 submarines were sunk in the battle. 7 more were damaged and forced to abort their patrols. In the arithmetic of the convoy war, this number looks manageable against 51 submarines committed to the engagement. In the arithmetic of what those losses actually represented, it was catastrophic. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Gretton left the convoy on May 6th. His flagship, HMS Duncan, had consumed fuel at a rate the battle's intensity had made inevitable, and he could not reach the convoy's destination without refueling. He transferred command to Commander Robert Sherwood on HMS Tay and turned back for Iceland. He monitored the radio traffic as the battle's climactic phase unfolded without him. The night of May 5th to 6th, the night before he left, had seen the most intense attacks of the entire battle. His escorts had fought in conditions of zero visibility, in seas that made every maneuver dangerous, against a concentration of submarines that should, by any reasonable assessment, have overwhelmed a defense of 9 ships. They had not been overwhelmed. They had fought with a controlled aggression that inflicted losses on the attacking force at a rate that the attacking force had not anticipated and could not sustain. What Gretton could not know as he turned for Iceland was that the battle he was leaving was already decided. The U-boat commanders in the water around ONS-5 were not pursuing a winning fight. They were absorbing losses that their operational experience told them were unsustainable, in conditions that prevented them from massing the force their tactics required against an escort that had somehow maintained its cohesion and its aggression through 7 days of continuous combat. The climactic night was May 5th. In fog so thick that visibility was measured in yards, the escorts used radar to locate attacking submarines and drove them off in a series of engagements so rapid and so disordered that individual commanders on both sides were making decisions in seconds with incomplete information. The fog that seemed to favor the submarines by blinding the escorts' visual search actually favored the escorts, whose radar worked in fog and whose opponents did not. 6 U-boats were driven off or sunk in a single night. The wolf pack that had been assembled to destroy ONS-5 was, by May 6th, broken. The convoy reached its destination. 30 of the original 43 merchant ships, plus the naval vessels that had joined during the passage, arrived at their ports. 13 ships lost, 7 U-boats destroyed, 7 more damaged. In Berlin, Dönitz examined the May figures. ONS-5 was not an isolated result. Throughout May 1943, as Allied countermeasures reached a critical mass of effectiveness, U-boat losses across the Atlantic reached rates that the German submarine arm could not sustain. 41 U-boats were sunk in the single month of May 1943. Against this rate of loss, the tonnage being sunk in Allied shipping had fallen dramatically. The exchange rate had inverted. In 1942, U-boats were sinking Allied ships faster than they could be replaced and losing submarines slower than they could be replaced. By May 1943, they were sinking Allied ships slower than they could be replaced and losing submarines faster than they could be replaced.
On May 24, 1943, Donitz wrote in his war diary that losses had reached an unbearable level and that the tonnage being sunk no longer justified the submarines being lost. He ordered his Atlantic fleet to withdraw temporarily from the main convoy routes. Temporarily. He intended to resume when new technology, the acoustic torpedo, better search receivers, the Type 21 submarine, tipped the balance back. The technology arrived too late and in insufficient numbers. The Atlantic battle that resumed in the autumn of 1943 was fought by a U-boat arm that had lost its most experienced crews and never recovered the initiative it had surrendered in May.
Peter Gretton never entirely made peace with having left his convoy before the final engagement. Intellectually, he understood that he had no choice. A destroyer without fuel is a liability rather than an asset, and leaving when he did was the correct decision by every operational standard available. Emotionally, the knowledge that the battle he had spent 7 days fighting had reached its climax the night after he left was a weight he carried for the rest of his life. He need not have carried it. The battle's outcome was not determined by the night of May 5th to 6th alone. It was determined by 7 days of continuous escort defense that kept the wolf pack from massing, that punished every attack with a counterattack, and that communicated to 51 German submarine commanders that this convoy was going to cost more than it was worth. Gretton built that. His crews sustained it. And the convoy that everyone said would never arrive, arrived, damaged, reduced, battered by a week of the worst weather and the most concentrated submarine attack in the history of naval warfare, but arrived. Dönitz called it unbearable in his war diary. Gretton called it Tuesday.